Rip it up. Jonathan Whitmore did not even look at the woman standing across the polished conference table. The command landed like a hammer. Every conversation died. Every laptop stopped clicking. A junior executive hesitated for half a second before grabbing the contract from Maya Brooks' hands. Jonathan snatched it away himself. His fingers tore through the thick paper with a slow, deliberate pull. The sound of ripping echoed beneath the soft hum of recessed lights. White sheets drifted onto the black marble floor like fallen snow. "That is exactly what your work is worth," Jonathan said, his voice calm enough to sting even more. A few executives lowered their eyes. Others smiled into expensive coffee cups, careful not to laugh too loudly. Maya remained still. Her dark navy blazer looked worn beside the custom-tailored suits surrounding her. The conference room smelled of fresh espresso, leather chairs, and polished walnut, but beneath it all lingered the metallic scent of tension. She slowly inhaled, refusing to let anyone see the tremble threatening her hands. Jonathan finally looked directly at her. His pale blue eyes carried the confidence of a man who had never expected to hear the word no. "Temporary contract workers do not interrupt billion-dollar negotiations," he said. "Especially not cleaning staff who somehow wandered into a boardroom." A quiet chuckle rolled around the long table. Someone whispered, "She should be grateful security has not removed her already." Maya swallowed the humiliation without answering. The projector reflected moving financial charts across the glass walls, blue light sliding over her face while dozens of impatient eyes waited for her to disappear. She could hear the ventilation system breathing overhead. She could hear the ticking of the antique clock mounted beside Jonathan's office door. Every second stretched tighter than the last. "Sir," she said softly, "please do not sign the replacement copy." Jonathan leaned back in his chair. "You still think anyone here cares what you have to say?" Maya's gaze shifted toward the fresh contract resting beside his silver fountain pen. "Because that one is not the same document." A brief silence settled over the room before laughter broke out again. One vice president actually clapped once. "This keeps getting better," another executive muttered. Jonathan smiled for the first time all morning. "Tell me," he said, "what incredible legal discovery did you make while delivering coffee?" Maya did not react. "Someone changed one page." Jonathan rolled his eyes. "Security." The heavy doors opened almost instantly. Two uniformed guards stepped inside, their polished shoes clicking sharply against the marble. Maya looked toward the windows instead of the guards. Rain clouds drifted beyond the Manhattan skyline, swallowing the afternoon sun until the entire room dimmed. The city outside looked strangely quiet. "You have one last chance," Jonathan said. "Walk out with dignity." Maya slowly bent down and picked up one torn piece of the contract from the floor. Her fingertips brushed the paper as if it still mattered. She stared at the shredded paragraph for one long heartbeat before carefully placing it on the conference table. "It does matter," she whispered. "That page was the only thing standing between your company and a disaster you will not survive." Nobody spoke. Then Jonathan laughed. It was short, controlled, almost amused. He reached for the untouched replacement contract, uncapped his pen, and signed his name with one confident stroke. Maya closed her eyes for the briefest moment. Somewhere behind the conference room wall, a phone began ringing. Then another. Then another. No one inside understood why every call was coming from the legal department at exactly the same time. The ringing refused to stop. One phone. Then three. Then every legal counsel seated along the glass wall reached for vibrating devices at the same time. The boardroom that had echoed with laughter seconds earlier suddenly filled with hushed voices and pale expressions. Jonathan Whitmore remained seated, one hand resting beside the fresh signature that still glistened with wet ink. His jaw tightened. "Answer it," he said without looking away from Maya. The company's chief legal officer stepped into the hallway, but returned less than a minute later. His face had lost all color. Tiny beads of sweat shimmered beneath the fluorescent lights despite the cool air humming through the ceiling vents. "Sir," he said quietly, There is a problem. Jonathan did not blink. There is always a problem. Solve it. The attorney swallowed hard. The compliance office says the archived draft no longer matches the executed version. Several executives exchanged confused glances. One woman quickly reopened the digital files on her tablet. Another scrolled through timestamps with trembling fingers. The soft tapping of keyboards filled the room like distant rainfall. Maya stood silently near the doorway, both security guards still beside her. Neither touched her now. One guard shifted his weight uneasily, his polished shoes scraping against the marble floor. Jonathan leaned forward. Explain. The liability protection clause is missing, the attorney answered. Silence crashed over the room. Jonathan frowned. Impossible. We thought so too. The attorney carefully turned his laptop toward the board table. Bright blue text highlighted a missing section. Without this language, our company accepts unlimited financial exposure if the merger fails. Someone whispered a number. $900 million. Another executive immediately corrected him. Closer to $1.4 billion after litigation. The room seemed to shrink. Even the projector's steady hum suddenly sounded louder. Jonathan slowly turned toward Maya. She was no longer looking at him. Instead, her eyes rested on the torn scraps still scattered beneath the conference table. You knew, Jonathan said. Maya finally met his eyes. I tried to tell you. How? His voice came lower now. Less certain. Nobody outside legal had access. Before Maya could answer, another attorney rushed through the doors carrying several thick binders. His breathing was uneven. Sir, we checked version history. He dropped the files onto the polished table with a heavy thud that startled everyone. Someone replaced the approved draft 23 minutes before the meeting. Every face turned toward Jonathan. His assistant froze, one hand still clutching a tablet. Who authorized the upload? Jonathan demanded. Fingers raced across keyboards again. Security cameras appeared on the giant display at the front of the room. Hallways. Elevators. Copy rooms. Employees moving in ordinary patterns. Then the footage stopped. Maya appeared on screen holding a folder against her chest. She was walking quickly toward the boardroom. She looked worried, not desperate. Seconds later, another figure entered the records office behind her carrying an identical folder. Zoom in, Jonathan ordered. The technician enlarged the image until it blurred. A badge swung against the stranger's jacket for only a fraction of a second before disappearing behind a shoulder. The room leaned closer together. The image sharpened just enough for one word to become visible. Internal audit. Nobody spoke. The attorney beside Jonathan quietly cleared his throat. Sir, internal audit has not existed for almost 6 years. A cold chill swept through the room that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Jonathan stared at the frozen frame without moving. Maya closed her eyes briefly as if she recognized something everyone else had missed. Then she whispered 4 words that made every executive forget about the missing contract. That is not an employee. Prove it, Jonathan Whitmore said, his voice sharp enough to cut through the suffocating silence. No one moved. Every eye locked onto Maya Brooks as though the entire 42nd floor had shifted onto her shoulders. The giant display still showed the frozen surveillance frame, the stranger's badge catching a thin streak of fluorescent light. Maya stepped closer without asking permission. Her heels clicked softly across the marble, each step louder than the last. One executive instinctively raised a phone to record. Another quietly lowered it after meeting Jonathan's glare. Zoom in on the left hand, Maya said. The technician hesitated. Jonathan gave a reluctant nod. The image expanded until the pixels blurred into graying. Then the stranger adjusted the folder for less than a second. A silver signet ring flashed beneath the overhead lights. Maya's expression changed instantly. Not fear. Recognition. Jonathan noticed. You have seen that ring before. She nodded once. 3 years ago. Murmurs swept across the room. Impossible, one executive whispered. She has only been here 2 weeks. Maya ignored him. I did not recognize the face, she said quietly. I recognized the habit. Jonathan folded his arms. Speak clearly. Maya looked directly at the frozen image. He always carries confidential documents with his left hand because the ring scratches expensive paper. The room fell silent again. Even the ventilation seemed to disappear. Jonathan's chief attorney frowned. That is absurd. Maya slowly reached into her worn leather portfolio. Several executives exchanged amused looks. She still thinks she belongs here. Someone muttered under his breath. Without responding, Maya unfolded an old photograph, slightly faded at the edges. She laid it gently beside the shattered remains of the contract. The picture showed a conference table almost identical to this one. Different city. Different people. The same silver ring glinting beneath bright lights. Jonathan leaned forward. His confidence faded for the first time. Where did you get this? Chicago, Maya answered. Federal Arbitration Conference. You attended that? Another executive asked with open disbelief. Maya did not answer him. Jonathan picked up the photograph himself. On the back was a printed date. 5 years earlier. Long before Maya had supposedly disappeared from corporate law. His thumb paused over one handwritten note. Risk Committee Final Review. The attorney beside him suddenly inhaled sharply. Wait. He grabbed the photograph. I know this room. Everyone turned toward him. That conference was invitation only. Jonathan's eyes narrowed. Continue. Only senior compliance architects were allowed inside. The attorney looked slowly toward Maya. Who exactly were you? Before Maya could answer, the technician interrupted from the control desk. Sir, I found something else. Every monitor in the room flickered. Security footage from another hallway appeared. The mysterious stranger entered the archive room carrying an empty folder. He walked out carrying a full one less than 90 seconds later. Then he stopped outside the elevator. He looked directly into the security camera. He smiled. Calmly. Confidently. As though he wanted someone to watch. Then he lifted one finger and tapped the side of his silver ring before disappearing through the elevator doors. Jonathan's assistant whispered. He knew we would review this footage. Nobody answered. Maya stared at the screen, her breathing slower now, almost controlled. Jonathan noticed something that unsettled him even more than the missing contract. She was not surprised anymore. You already knew who he was, Jonathan said. Maya remained silent. Answer me. Her eyes stayed fixed on the frozen image. No, she said at last. I know who sent him. Every heartbeat in the boardroom seemed to stop. Jonathan opened his mouth to demand a name, but the attorney's phone vibrated once more. He looked at the screen, and the color drained from his face. Without saying a word, he slowly turned the phone toward Jonathan. Across the top of the email was one line that had been sent exactly 2 minutes earlier. Welcome back, Maya. We have been waiting for you. The email remained on the screen like a silent threat. Nobody breathed. Nobody reached for a phone. The only sound came from the air conditioning pushing cold air across the glass walls while the fluorescent lights reflected sharply against the polished steel trim around the conference table. Jonathan Whitmore slowly lowered the phone onto the marble. His fingers no longer looked steady. Who sent this? He demanded. No one answered. Maya Brooks stared at the message for another second before quietly shaking her head. It was meant for me, she said. Not for you. Several executives exchanged nervous glances. The room that had mocked her only minutes earlier now seemed afraid to even whisper her name. Jonathan's pride surged back before his fear could settle in. He stood abruptly, the leather chair sliding backward with a harsh scrape. Enough. His voice echoed through the boardroom. You walk into my company, interrupt my meeting, predict a crisis, and now anonymous messages are appearing? He stepped closer until only a few feet separated them. Tell me what game you are playing. Maya did not move. The reflection of the overhead lights shimmered across the tear gathering in one executive's untouched coffee cup. "If I wanted to play games," Maya replied softly, "I would have let you sign without saying a word." Jonathan's jaw tightened. Around them, dozens of eyes shifted between the billionaire and the woman everyone had dismissed as temporary staff. His authority was beginning to crack, and everyone could feel it. Suddenly another notification chimed. Then another. Then nearly every company-issued tablet on the conference table lit up at once. One by one, confidential project folders began disappearing from the shared legal database. The technician looked up in panic. "Files are being deleted." Fingers raced across keyboards. The clicking became frantic. "Recover them," Jonathan barked. "I cannot," the technician answered. "Someone already has administrator access." A wave of whispers spread across the room. Sweat rolled down the chief attorney's temple despite the freezing air. Maya looked toward the massive display wall instead of the panicked employees. "Stop restoring backups," she said. Nobody listened. "Listen to me," she repeated louder this time. Jonathan laughed bitterly. "You still think you are in charge?" Maya's eyes never left the monitor. "If you restore the backup server now, you will erase the only evidence showing who entered your system." The room froze again. One systems engineer slowly removed his hands from the keyboard. She might be right." Jonathan turned sharply. "You are taking technical advice from someone who was standing outside this room an hour ago?" The engineer swallowed hard but nodded. "If the attacker planted a timed overwrite, restoring too early destroys the activity logs." Silence swallowed the room. Jonathan looked around and saw something he had never experienced before. His own executives were no longer looking at him for answers. They were looking at Maya. The realization hit him harder than the missing contract. His authority was slipping away in real time. "No," he snapped. "Nobody changes protocol because of her." Maya slowly walked toward the giant display. The security guards instinctively stepped aside without realizing it. She pointed at the timeline running across the screen. There. A tiny gray dot blinked between two access records. Almost invisible. "Zoom in." The technician hesitated only long enough to glance at Jonathan before obeying Maya instead. The timeline expanded. Hidden beneath thousands of ordinary system requests sat one encrypted login made exactly 24 minutes before the meeting began. The username appeared only for a fraction of a second before disappearing behind corrupted data. Every face leaned closer. The technician magnified the frame again until one word finally became readable. "Founder." The room erupted with confused whispers. Jonathan's expression hardened. "That account cannot exist," he said quietly. "It was permanently deleted after my father died." Maya looked at him with calm eyes. "Then someone inside this building has been pretending your father never left." At that exact moment, the lights flickered once. The conference room doors unlocked with a sharp electronic click, and slow footsteps echoed from the hallway outside. The footsteps stopped outside the glass doors. Every conversation vanished. Even the frantic tapping on keyboards faded into a silence so heavy that the faint vibration from the building's ventilation system sounded like a distant engine straining under impossible pressure. Jonathan Whitmore squared his shoulders, refusing to let anyone see the uncertainty in his eyes. "Open the doors," he ordered. Nobody moved. The electronic locks released with a soft click before anyone touched them. The doors drifted inward. A gray-haired woman in a dark-tailored suit stepped inside, followed by two federal compliance officers carrying sealed evidence cases. Their polished shoes echoed across the marble floor. Every investor around the table instinctively straightened. Jonathan frowned. "Who authorized this?" The woman ignored him. Her eyes settled on Maya Brooks first. "Miss Brooks." Her voice was calm. Respectful. The room noticed. Jonathan noticed even more. "You know her?" he demanded. Before the woman could answer, Jonathan's head of communications whispered urgently. "Sir." He turned a tablet toward him. Financial news alerts were exploding across every major business network. Whitmore Capital shares halted pending investigation. Internal control failure suspected. Phones began vibrating across the room again. Investors who had laughed at Maya barely 20 minutes earlier were now stepping away from the conference table to answer panicked calls. The atmosphere shifted from confidence to survival. Jonathan grabbed the tablet. "This is impossible. Nothing has been announced." The compliance officer calmly placed a sealed envelope on the table. "It has now." Jonathan stared at the government seal without touching it. His reflection trembled across the polished surface of the envelope. Maya remained silent near the windows, sunlight finally breaking through the storm clouds outside and casting a narrow beam across the shredded contract pieces still scattered on the floor. One executive slowly bent down to pick up a torn page, but stopped halfway as though suddenly ashamed. Jonathan noticed the gesture. His chest tightened. "This is because of her," he snapped, pointing toward Maya. "She has manipulated this entire situation." Several heads turned toward Maya again. For one painful moment, the old suspicion returned. The temporary employee. The outsider. The woman who never belonged. One investor folded his arms. "Perhaps she planted everything." Another nodded cautiously. "It would explain how she knew." Maya lowered her eyes. She did not defend herself. The silence hurt more than any accusation. Jonathan seized the moment. "Escort her out," he ordered. Neither security guard moved. "Did you hear me?" Still nothing. Finally, one of them answered quietly without looking at Jonathan. "Sir, she is under federal witness protection protocol now." The words landed harder than thunder. Every face in the room changed. Jonathan blinked once. "What?" The gray-haired woman stepped beside Maya. "Miss Brooks was instructed to remain silent until evidence confirmed unauthorized access." Jonathan laughed in disbelief. "You expect me to believe my temporary contract analyst is working with federal investigators?" "No," the woman replied. "She was never your contract analyst." The room froze. Maya slowly removed the plain visitor badge clipped to her blazer. She placed it gently on the conference table. Underneath, another identification card rested against the fabric. Dark blue. Silver lettering. The compliance officers exchanged respectful glances the moment they saw it. Jonathan's breathing became uneven. "Who are you?" he whispered. Maya looked at him for the first time without fear. "Someone who tried to save your company before you destroyed the evidence yourself." No one laughed. No one spoke. Across the room, the technician suddenly gasped. His monitor flashed bright red. Someone just accessed the founder account again. Every screen in the boardroom turned black. Then a single live camera feed appeared. A man wearing the same silver ring was standing inside Whitmore Capital's underground records vault, calmly placing one hand on a steel archive cabinet before looking directly into the camera. Then he smiled and reached for the master power switch. The image froze one heartbeat before the hand touched the master power switch. Nobody spoke. Nobody even reached for a keyboard. The boardroom had become so still that the faint vibration of a forgotten cell phone against polished walnuts sounded impossibly loud. Jonathan Whitmore stared at the enormous screen, but his eyes kept drifting back to Maya Brooks. Only minutes ago she had been standing alone with shredded papers at her feet. Now every executive unconsciously watched her before making a decision. The shift unsettled him more than the investigation itself. "Do something," Jonathan whispered. The technician swallowed. His fingers hovered above the keyboard but never touched it. "Sir, if I interrupt the feed now, we lose the trace." Jonathan's breathing slowed, but only because panic had settled deeper. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, rain slid quietly down the glass while the late afternoon sun struggled through the clouds, turning the Manhattan skyline into a blur of silver and pale gold. The city kept moving. Inside the boardroom, time seemed frozen. Maya stepped closer to the display. Her footsteps echoed softly across the marble, measured and unhurried. One investor who had openly mocked her earlier lowered his eyes as she passed. Another quietly pushed his untouched coffee away, unable to look at the torn contract still scattered across the floor. Nobody apologized. Nobody had the courage yet. The gray-haired compliance director studied Maya with quiet respect. "You have seen this before," she said. Maya did not answer immediately. Her reflection shimmered across the black monitor. "Yes," she finally replied. "The silence always comes first." Jonathan looked at her sharply. "What does that mean?" Maya kept watching the screen. "People think the attack begins when systems fail." Her voice remained almost gentle. "It actually begins when everyone is too frightened to trust each other." The words settled heavily over the room. Several executives instinctively glanced at one another before quickly looking away. Suspicion had already done its work. Jonathan noticed it too. For the first time in years, his own leadership team no longer looked united. His company was breaking apart without a single raised voice. A soft chime interrupted the silence. The technician frowned. The network traffic stopped. Another pause. Completely. Jonathan blinked. Stopped? There is nothing. The screen showing system activity emptied one by one until only black backgrounds remained. No alerts. No downloads. No attacks. Just silence. The absence frightened everyone more than the chaos had. Maya slowly closed her eyes for one brief moment. "He is finished taking what he wanted." The sentence landed like ice water. Jonathan felt it immediately. "What did he take?" Maya looked toward the shattered contract instead of answering. The compliance director followed her gaze. Then, almost absent-mindedly, she bent down and picked up one torn fragment lying near the conference table leg. She turned it over. Her expression changed. "Jonathan," she said quietly. "Come here." He walked over, slower than anyone had ever seen him move. The paper contained only a few printed words and a faded signature. Most people would have thrown it away. Jonathan stared at it for several long seconds. His face slowly lost all color. "No," he whispered. One executive leaned forward. "What is it?" Jonathan never answered. His thumb gently brushed the ink as though afraid it might disappear. Maya watched him with calm, unreadable eyes. "You recognize it now," she said. Jonathan nodded almost imperceptibly. "My father." His voice barely existed. "That is his original signature." Every person around the table stopped breathing. Jonathan had believed the page contained nothing but legal language. Instead, hidden inside the document he had destroyed with his own hands was the only original authorization his late father had ever signed for the company that carried their family name. No backup existed. No skin carried legal weight. Jonathan slowly looked up the shredded pieces covering the marble floor, realizing he had personally destroyed the one document he had spent his entire career trying to protect. Across the room, the silent monitor flickered once. Without warning, the black screen dissolved into a single sentence written in white letters. "You are finally ready to remember the truth." The words glowed against the black screen with almost unbearable stillness. "You are finally ready to remember the truth." Nobody dared to speak. The boardroom lights reflected across anxious faces while dozens of cell phone cameras, once hidden beneath the table, quietly rose into view. Jonathan Whitmore stood motionless, the torn signature fragment trembling between his fingers. The man who had controlled billion-dollar negotiations with effortless confidence now looked like someone searching for solid ground that no longer existed. Then the screen changed again. A video began to play. Grainy security footage filled the wall-sized display. The timestamp showed 6 years earlier. The same boardroom. The same polished table. Jonathan's late father, Charles Whitmore, sat at the head of the room surrounded by attorneys. Across from him sat a younger Maya Brooks, wearing a navy suit instead of a visitor badge, calmly presenting a thick legal binder. A wave of stunned whispers rolled across the room. One investor slowly lowered his phone, unable to believe what he was seeing. Jonathan stared at the image as though the room itself had vanished. No, he whispered. That cannot be her. The recording continued. Charles smiled warmly at Maya before sliding the final contract toward her. His voice filled the silent room. Miss Brooks, this protection framework will safeguard this company long after both of us are gone. Maya on the recording hesitated before signing the witness certification. Charles looked directly at the executives around him. Remember this. If anyone ever changes these clauses, trust Maya before you trust the paperwork. Silence crashed over the boardroom. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Jonathan's shoulders slowly dropped. Every executive who had laughed at Maya only an hour before now avoided looking in her direction. The humiliation had turned completely around. Maya never smiled. She never looked victorious. She simply watched the screen with quiet sadness, as though she had hoped this day would never come. The recording ended. The black screen reflected every stunned face back at itself. Jonathan swallowed hard. Why? His voice cracked. Why did my father never tell me? Maya answered softly without taking her eyes off the empty display. He tried. Jonathan frowned. What does that mean? Maya reached into her portfolio one final time and carefully placed the sealed envelope beside the shredded contract. The paper had yellowed with age. Charles Whitmore's handwriting stretched neatly across the front. To Jonathan. Open only if Maya Brooks ever warns you personally. Jonathan's breathing became uneven. His hands hesitated above the envelope, as though touching it might change everything he believed about his father and himself. Around the table, even the federal compliance officers remained silent. The room no longer belonged to power. It belonged to truth. Jonathan finally broke the seal. Inside rested a single handwritten letter. His eyes scanned the first few lines. The color drained from his face almost instantly. A tear gathered despite every effort to stop it. He looked at Maya with a mixture of disbelief and regret so raw that several investors quietly turned away. I fired the one person. His voice disappeared. Maya gently finished the sentence for him. Your father trusted most. Nobody defended Jonathan anymore. Nobody questioned Maya. The balance of power had completely shifted without a single raised voice. Then the technician suddenly stood up so fast that his chair rolled backward across the marble. Miss Brooks, his voice shook. The founder account just uploaded one final file. Every monitor lit up again. Across the top of the screen appeared one chilling title. Whitmore Succession Protocol. Scheduled to become public in 60 seconds. The countdown appeared in the corner of every screen. 59 seconds. 58. No alarms sounded. No voices rose. The quiet was heavier than panic. The soft vibration of cooling projectors and distant elevator motors became the only sounds inside the boardroom. Every face remained fixed on the glowing title. Whitmore Succession Protocol. Jonathan Whitmore lowered the letter from his father's trembling hands. His shoulders, once perfectly squared with authority, seemed to collapse beneath an invisible weight. The investors who had spent years following his every decision now watched him with sympathy instead of confidence. It was the first time in decades he looked less like a billionaire, and more like a son who had misunderstood his father. Maya Brooks remained exactly where she had been standing. Her posture never changed. Her breathing stayed calm. She neither stepped forward nor away. The dignity in her silence drew every eye in the room more powerfully than any speech could have. One of the senior investors quietly walked toward the shredded contract scattered across the marble floor. Without saying a word, he bent down and carefully gathered the torn pages with both hands. Another executive joined him. Then another. Within seconds, the very people who had laughed while Jonathan destroyed the document were kneeling together, gently collecting every fragment, as though handling something sacred. Nobody instructed them to do it. Maya noticed but said nothing. Jonathan watched the scene unfold with glassy eyes. The realization cut deeper than any financial loss ever could. They were trying to repair what he himself had destroyed. The gray-haired compliance director slowly turned toward the room. Everyone stopped recording. One by one, cell phones lowered. The tiny red recording lights disappeared. This moment no longer belonged on social media. It belonged to everyone standing inside the room. Jonathan finally looked directly at Maya. The silence between them stretched longer than any board meeting he had ever led. "I judged you before I listened," he said quietly. His voice carried none of its usual authority. "I saw your badge, not your character." Nobody interrupted. Nobody looked away. Maya's expression softened, but only slightly. "You were not the first," she answered. "And I hope you will not be the last person who learns from it." Her words held no anger. No triumph. Only honesty. The executives exchanged uneasy glances. Several of them remembered their own whispered comments, their laughter, the way they had refused to meet her eyes earlier that afternoon. The humiliation no longer belonged to Maya. It belonged to every person who had decided who she was before hearing a single sentence from her. Jonathan slowly crossed the room. Every polished shoe echoed softly against the marble. When he stopped in front of Maya, the entire board instinctively stood. Nobody remained seated. Jonathan looked down at the visitor badge lying on the conference table. With careful hands, he picked it up. He stared at the cheap plastic card for a long moment before quietly placing it into his own jacket pocket. "Nobody in this company will ever wear this because of prejudice again," he said. Maya did not answer immediately. Instead, she looked toward the enormous windows where the rain had finally stopped. Warm evening sunlight broke through the clouds, washing golden reflections across the skyline and filling the boardroom with a light that had been missing all day. The atmosphere changed almost imperceptibly. It no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a place where truth had finally entered. The countdown reached 12 seconds. The technician spoke barely above a whisper. "The protocol is still going public." Jonathan turned toward the screen, then back toward Maya. "Can it be stopped?" She held his gaze for a long, silent heartbeat. "Yes," she replied softly. "But only if your father believed you were finally ready." The timer fell to 5, 4, 3. Every breath in the room slowed. Then the monitor flickered, and Charles Whitmore's face appeared once more, looking directly into the camera as though he had been waiting years for this exact moment. Charles Whitmore's face filled the screen, not as a billionaire, but as an aging father whose tired eyes carried more warmth than authority. The room became perfectly still. Even the low mechanical hum from the ventilation seemed to disappear beneath his voice. "Jonathan," he said gently, "if you are watching this, then you have reached the moment I prayed would never come." No one shifted. No one looked away. The evening light reflected across the glass walls, washing the room in soft gold instead of the cold white glare that had dominated the day. Charles continued, "A company can survive losing money. It cannot survive losing character. If Maya Brooks has interrupted your certainty, listen to her before you defend yourself. I trusted her judgment because she always protected people before profits." Jonathan lowered his head. The words struck harder than any market collapse. Around the boardroom, investors slowly exchanged quiet glances. Every assumption they had made about Maya now felt painfully small. Charles smiled faintly in the recording. "One day you will inherit my company. I only hope you never mistake power for wisdom." The screen faded to black. Nobody applauded. Nobody spoke. The silence itself became the tribute. Jonathan stood motionless for several long seconds before taking one careful step toward Maya. Then another. His polished shoes echoed softly across the marble floor where scraps of the torn contract had already been gathered into neat stacks by the very people who had laughed when he destroyed it. He stopped in front of her. The billionaire who had once refused to meet her eyes now struggled to hold them. "Miss Brooks," he said quietly, "I cannot undo what I said." His voice nearly disappeared. "But I will spend the rest of my career making sure no one else is judged the way I judged you." Maya looked at him without anger, without satisfaction, only compassion. "Then your father raised you better than you believed," she answered. Jonathan nodded once. It was the smallest movement anyone had ever seen from him, yet somehow the strongest. He extended his hand. Not as an employer. Not as a billionaire. Simply as one human being asking another for grace. Maya studied his hand for a brief moment before accepting it. The handshake lasted only a few seconds, but every person in the room understood they were watching something larger than a business agreement. The balance of power had not changed because one person won. It had changed because one person chose dignity over revenge. The compliance director quietly closed her evidence case. The federal officers stepped back without a word. One by one, the executives lowered their eyes, not out of fear, but respect. The technician carefully restored the company seal to the main display. Beneath it appeared a new authorization line. Chief Integrity Advisor. Jonathan looked toward Maya. The position has never existed, he admitted. Maya smiled softly. Maybe it always should have. Outside, the rain had completely stopped. The clouds drifted apart, revealing the last light of the evening stretching across the skyline. Warm sunlight reflected from the neighboring towers and spilled through the windows, touching the repaired stack of contract pages resting neatly on the conference table. Jonathan quietly removed the cheap visitor badge from his jacket pocket. Without a word, he placed it beside the company's gold executive nameplate, leaving them side by side. No one reached for either one. They no longer represented status. They represented a lesson the room would never forget. Maya picked up her worn leather portfolio and walked toward the doors with the same calm pace she had carried all day. This time, every person in the boardroom stepped aside to let her pass. No one was asked to move. They simply did. Her footsteps echoed gently down the hallway before fading into the quiet building. Jonathan remained standing beside the window, watching the final rays of sunlight settle over the city his father had once built, and the woman he had almost failed to recognize. Behind him, the torn contract had been carefully reconstructed page by page. Ahead of him, the glass reflected not the billionaire he had always tried to become, but the man he had finally chosen to be.